Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack for Business podcast. Over 300 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game. Are you ready to discover what your Knack for Business truly is? Your hosts are Bernie Franz-Grote from Creative Insight and Wayne Pratt from Motivate You Inc.
Today's topic is unleash your inner leader. So, from the audience perspective, the question asks, how can you overcome self-doubt and unlock your full leadership potential to grow your business? Today, our guest is Casey Jakubowski. Casey is the founder and president of Tamer, powered by CTJ Solutions, dedicated to helping you and your team grow from okay to outstanding. The author of multiple books, articles, and guest speaker, Dr. J provides coaching to overcome imposter syndrome, conflict, and find success for people who are stuck. With over 20 years of leadership, Dr. J helps with strategic planning, professional development, and creativity. Casey, welcome, Dr. J. Do you have a favorite quote or saying?
I think that my favorite quote or saying is, do well by doing good with others.
I can appreciate that one, and I think that's a really good, poignant one. Imposter syndrome. I think we should perhaps define it and then define it in relationship to leaders. Like, why does a leader think I'm a poser, to use a colloquialism?
One big area of defining imposter syndrome is you feel like you don't belong. You feel like you don't have the knowledge, the expertise, and the skill. Leadership is more than just a title. Leadership is your thoughts, your actions, your judgment, and how you motivate your team to do not just their level best, but their very best. And one area that a lot of leaders struggle with is this idea of not only do I belong, but do I even qualify to get there? And I want people to think about themselves in terms of their 4-year-old or 5-year-old self. Nobody says, I want to grow up to be basic. They all say, I want to grow up to be an astronaut, a firefighter, a teacher, a doctor, a lawyer. I want to be a construction worker. Nobody ever says, I want to have drudgery where I check in and check out every day. We have to do better. We have to do better for ourselves first.
Casey, what's a doctorate?
It's in leadership, specialization in how to help people grow from okay to outstanding. I did a lot of work in education with policy, but I've also done work in sociology, political science, with history. And one of the areas that I think is super critical is a lot of people feel like the only way you're really a leader is if you go through a master's in business administration, or you're only a leader if XYZ happens. And that, I think, feeds into imposter syndrome, because a lot of times folks are told, no, you're not good enough. You look at statistics, and there's been a lot of gatekeeping in people's lives, such as how many people really are waiting for somebody to award them with a promotion, when in reality, they need to go out and say, you know what? I can do that role. I can be that person. I've learned. I've had experiences. And part of the biggest problem that I've encountered in my career professionally, but also in doing the coaching work, is people don't believe in themselves. And people don't believe in the talents that their teams bring to the table. We have to believe.
I get what you're saying. And I've been in places where there's other people that are, I wouldn't say imposters. Their ego is so strong, they're front and center. How does that fit in? How does that not overwhelm people and push them back? In other words, full of hot air, basically.
It starts with understanding that research has just come out from major research journals that the higher people climb on ladders for management or administration, the less they're willing to receive feedback about maybe their ideas aren't great. And I call that hubris, which means puffed up and full of yourself. And this will destroy businesses, because if you have a right person in a leadership role, they will seek others, gather data, and they will listen to expertise. And then they will make a decision that they can explain that's more than a gut reaction. I also think for a lot of people, especially in small businesses, they struggle with the conflict of, I need to be all things to all people instead of being a conductor. No orchestra sounds amazing without the instrument players. But far too many people think it's the conductor that does all the hard work. In reality, the conductor creates the symphony by asking each person and instrument to do their part, blending them together, and setting the tempo and the rhythm.
Does great leadership or bad leadership affect innovation?
Oh, absolutely. You would be surprised how many great ideas have wound up in the garbage bin because some didn't understand that the application was far ahead of where the organization was, or far ahead. And it's the idea that we have to face the facts that our people, our innovators, are often folks who are quirky, talented, and if given the opportunity to run around and go through their creative explosion, innovation will happen. Instead, they got to fill out a form, be at their desk. They got to take lunch when everybody else is assigned to it. They got to appear in a very boring, bland business building. We need leaders to give permission and to give people the backing when they say, I've got this off the wall idea. You have to give them space to be awesome.
How do you prevent someone going off the rails? Like, you can have a great innovative idea. Maybe it's another way to fly a plane. You just don't have any engineering skills, but you have a concept, right? And you start going off and the company can't, or the agency can't support the endeavor. So how do you balance it? Because at some point in time you go, like the idea, it's either not, you can't deliver it, and not the person, but the organization can't deliver it, or it's wrong time, wrong place. Good idea, but I can't make that magic happen at this time without actually breaking the person.
Yeah.
It's the spirit. So how do you keep it going? It's almost like having a crew of people around you as an advisory board, but not a formal thing. We're going, cool idea, but, and here's the limitations.
Yeah.
The physical laws of science kick in, or we're not there yet. How do you manage that?
Wonderful question, because I go back to the fact that Leonardo da Vinci did not have an engineering degree. Picasso didn't have formal art training. I want leaders to use the phrase yes and, as opposed to yes but. For a lot of companies, there is significant slack in the day-to-day minutia vis-a-vis the ability to really work on a great big issue. So if we're talking about violating the laws of physics, we're going to work around those. People have been talking about going to space for how long? Go back to ancient China. They tried to rocket themselves using fireworks into outer space, and it didn't work. It took until the 1960s to do that. But what can we do now that we could not do 5 years ago, 10 years ago? I live in the humanities, I live in the social sciences, but I know enough STEM to be dangerous. One phrase that I heard was the science we do in 2025 would be considered supernatural in 1750. It's important for us to realize that we have bright people out there who've been told yes, but, or no. And we haven't had more people told yes, and, or let's look at doing creativity. Let's look at advancing something that we don't think's advanceable. But at the end of the day, I want to be able to listen to my cat meow at me and understand exactly what that cat is. According to artificial intelligence, they're getting to the point within 7 years to 10 years that you'll be able to have a conversation with your cat or your dog who would like to have instantaneous translations. We're getting almost to the point where you can utilize an app on your phone to have a conversation with a friend of yours who's speaking Hindi or another one of the languages. You needed somebody to do that work. And even earlier in the 15, 16, and 1700s, you needed boundary spanners who not only knew English or French, but they also began to pick up on native First Nation languages in Canada. We've done it before. The difference is now we can do it with enormous speed because there is almost infinite computer power out there. There are tools where you can actually do predictive analysis using programs. We have to start giving more permission and less restrictions to people. And that requires a leader to say, I'm not afraid of the future, even though I might not know. I've hired the talent who does know.
Casey, I have a question. A lot of our listeners are solopreneurs. I think of them as cowboys, regardless of gender. The solopreneur is very much the person on the horse riding out. A lot of these are ex-corporate people. In a perfect world, what does the corp bring that the solopreneur doesn't have, where it is a federation that works? What should the corp be doing?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Why do you think people leave good, compensated corporate jobs to go into entrepreneurship? Normally, it's because they are just exhausted with the bureaucracy. They're exhausted with the inability of people around them to see things, and they're tired of fighting within constriction. So what they want to do is they want to go forth, do work, and live and breathe and do their thing. Because most jobs and most business is created by large corporations. When in reality, the research says that it's the solo entrepreneur, it's the very small mom and pop business, or it's the very, very lean startup that creates the majority of economic wealth. And if the corporations want to be agile or nimble, they can't go in and say, we're going to be agile and nimble, but still have a corporate vice president of wiping the wall or the executive director of making sure that the bathroom tissue is restocked in a certain color. Because when you have bureaucracy, when you have structure, you take away from the ability to pivot quickly and you take away from passion. People want to be engaged and involved in something they're passionate about. I know of nobody who wants to go in and make sure that Form 38/9 is filled out correctly. For a lot of people that are sitting there, they're going, are you kidding me? Let's figure out hunger. Let's figure out environmental justice. Let's make sure that people who are with family members suffering from dementia can have those memory conversations again. Let's do that.
So, what's a perfect environment then for this type of success? It comes down to being if some people are like status quo, which is fine, and some people like this to be a disruptor and not to be a pain. That's the innovation piece kicking in. What's the perfect environment that provides balance to both parties?
Mhm. I love that question because you need to have people who recognize that they are not the smartest person in the room. They need to provide the space and the oxygen for the really smart people in the room. It's difficult when people become concerned about proving to others that they're in charge or in control. If you look at the genius of a lot of people when they're out in the world or innovating, the genius is they are trusted by leaders who are like, you go forth and do something crazy innovative, and we'll figure out how to make it work. Somebody realizes a problem and they can look at the problem and go, wow, this solution's staring me in the face. For a lot of folks, it becomes the opportunity where the barriers to entry are really high right now. You need to know a lawyer, you need to know an accountant, you need to, when you start hiring people, have HR. A lot of this is, I have an idea, how do I convince others? Nobody wants to do, I have this idea, I've convinced others, and now I have to make sure the paperwork's correct. For the innovative world, for the leadership world, you need to find people who are talented in ways that they may have been overlooked before. I think one of the best environments is creating a group of misfit toys. And if any of you remember that TV show, it was Rudolph and the Isle of Misfit Toys, when they found their home and they found little children who were different, those toys found purpose. And for a lot of us, we are wasting huge amounts of talent because we want people who are square pegs to fit into triangle holes, or we want round pegs to not roll off a table.
So, how do we foster this? Is it training? Is it environmental? How do we foster what we're looking for?
Wonderful question that has a lot to do with mindset. So one of the biggest problems that I find with folks who are titled in administration and management is they have a self-preservation mindset. I love the perks that come along with this six-figure salary or high five-figure salary. I love the title. I love the fact that I can drive a status symbol car. I love the fact that I am important and that people have to do stuff based upon my whims. Versus true leaders who they will create environments where the people who are their colleagues will be asked to answer pie in the sky questions, not for self-preservation, because they're not in the mood for self-preservation. What they really are is doing well by doing right by others. Leaders are defined, as Simon Sinek's work says, by clearly explaining not the what, not the how, but the why. It also comes down to some of the work that Lencioni has talked about in 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. You need to be able to disagree. You need to be able to have knockdown drag outs, but you're all rowing in the same direction. I have found So many people are afraid about how they're going to put their kids through college, how they're going to pay the mortgage, how they're going to pay the car payment. What they're not focusing on is that the people under them have innate and developed talents. And what we do is we tell people you need to make 150 boxes of paper sales this month if you're in Dunder Mifflin down in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the office. Some people would argue that Michael Scott was a near genius and that he stayed out of his people's way because he was so incompetent, he didn't know what he was doing. And yet, when you look at it, all those characters, except for maybe Kevin, who really did a doozy with the auditing for the auditing department, they really found their own. And they really were much more than just paper salespeople. And I think that part of it is that we need more people to say, you know what? I do want to pay the mortgage. I do want to pay the car. I want to take care of my children's college. I want to have good food on the table. But I'd rather find a good place to work and live and ply my trade than to be part of an organization where I'm going to go home every day and go, what did I honestly do today? What am I honestly doing on Monday? What honestly am I doing over my career?
I'm assuming from talking to you that you believe leaders are created, not born. So how do we accidentally create some leadership?
It's really funny because I have gone through a lot of my life leadership development training opportunities. I was very actively involved as a young person in scouting and earned my Eagle, which is the highest award in the United States. I went through something called Distributive Education Clubs of America, where I learned how to do marketing and leadership training. I've been Lean and Six Sigma certified, which is an international process to help improve it. And at the end of the day, what everybody talks about in these leadership trainings is the same story. Leadership isn't management or administration, because management and administration is getting the cogs moving. Leadership is causing the cogs to move on their own because they're inspired. And for those of us who believe that a leader can be made, what we have to do is teach people how to let their hubris go, let their ego go, and sit there and ask what are referred to as naive questions. So I get that you're saying that we've got to look at this widget. Can you tell me a little bit more about this widget and what are we doing with it? Because at the end of the day, I may know everything there is to know for a widget, but if my team member came off the floor, they were inspired to come up and say, I think we could be doing this better. That's bravery, especially in organizations where that wasn't tolerated.
To have this open mindset seems to be a strategy plan. And how do you have a long range strategy plan? If you're in the business of creating new products, you have an innovation R&D sector. And usually most people, that's over there. That's wild stuff happens in creative thoughts. If you're a small business, how do you don't have an R&D section? You are the R&D section. Your crew is the R&D section. How do you allow for that to prosper and then have a strategy going every 6 months, every year, every 2 years? Are we doing good? Is there a better way of doing it? Or is it the epiphany of the moment when someone goes, imagine that. It's when you take that shower first thing in the morning, the thought pops in your head going, oh, eureka.
Yeah.
I think it was a shower or a bath.
Yeah, it was a bath. And it starts really not by saying we're going to do this regularly. What you need to do is, as organizations with strategic planning, the aha moments can be for a couple of different reasons. The first reason is, do we have to accomplish something because somebody else is asking us to do the strategic plan? That's the worst way to go about doing strategic planning. The second way to do strategic planning is, we don't like what we're doing, we need to improve. That assumes a mindset, and usually it's a metric-based mindset. Sales are down, employee retention's in the bath. Maybe we're not getting repeat customers the way we want to. We're not growing in our market. But really, the best way to think about strategic planning is a 360 evaluation of what's going on. What did we start out with our idea? Everybody wants to have a perfect mission, vision, whatever. There's no perfection in the world. What there really is giving your best shot and learning. For strategic planning, you got to understand your resources. You have to understand your people. You have to understand the people outside your organization that pay you money. What's driving them? I think for a lot of folks, if they don't understand what's driving their customer, they don't understand what's driving their worker, they don't understand what's driving their business, what they really have done is stumbled upon a happy accident. We can't be accidental. We have to look at how to move forward with this idea of, what are we doing well? What could we do better? And why do we want to do this? And how does this relate to when we all got together? Now, of course, people will say, oh, I've got a small business. It's been around for a while. It was grandpa's or grandma's or great-grandpa or great-grandma's. I don't know, they needed to do something. Yes. If you think about it, there is a hierarchy of needs. And mostly it starts with, are you safe? Do you have a house? Are you warm? Are you eating? If you can say, my business answers one of those questions, then you should be good to go. And you have to differentiate why you are the best. If you move up your hierarchy of needs, belonging, safety, security, passion, self-fulfillment, that's where your differentiation starts. Because you never can sell a computer, because everybody wants to buy a computer. What you sell to them is what that computer is going to do for them and what it represents and how their life will be better. You sell them the story. And what you do is you sell them a product that makes them keep coming back to experience the story over and over again.
A lot of our listeners, what I've seen, are fundamentally technicians. They may or may not be in the trades, but basically they take a product, they find a client, they sell the client, they get paid by the client, and they move on. They have done all the lifting themselves. How do they even find the development tools that aren't just glommed on like bad wallpaper so that they can actually be doing have more?
Yeah, and really that's professional development, and it's a goal of creating a learning space. One area that I am truly amazed about is folks are so unaware nowadays of what's going on in their community. They're so unaware of opportunities. They're so unaware of developments because they're so focused on making sure that sales gets done, work gets done, things get done, that they're working in the business, but not on the business. They're not working on building up the knowledge and the skills that will allow them to look at change. I am so fortunate because I do a lot of work in higher education realms with innovation. But I also go intentionally to entrepreneurship events, and I go to networking at events. And I try to allow myself an hour of getting lost a day. Maybe I'm watching TV trying to decompress for the day, and the TV says Catherine de' Medici was mother to the King of France, who was 16 when he was crowned. I go take a look at that. With Google, you can find that out. And then 30 minutes later, I'm looking at how the architecture of medieval France changed and created situations where the plague spread because people were dumping out their water in a place that wasn't going to go right into the wells in Paris. I think for us, we've lost the innate curiosity that we are all born with and gets beaten out of us in the majority of our education. As a certified teacher, I can say that as somebody who teaches teacher candidates, I beg my candidates, I beg my teachers, let creativity reign. Inquire into things that are awesome. I had a student yesterday, ran into her after class. We were talking about how a queen in ancient Egypt dressed as a king and insisted her subjects call her by king. And she's like, why did that happen? I said, I don't know, but you've got your phone. This morning, I get an email from her that is a page and a half in length about the development of the word king, the development of the word queen, why this particular queen wanted to be a king, and why don't we ever talk about this? And then she says to me today, that was the most fun I've ever had in my life. Because at the end of the day, you got into your business, you got into your development, you got into doing this stuff because you had a burning passion. You didn't care for what was. You cared about what could be. We have to go back to the curiosity.
Do you know a couple industries showcasing this better than others, which gives you some bragging stories?
Yeah, so I had a group of people that had started a company that they felt there were a lot of instances where people were getting scared and they needed some sort of app that would allow for cross-platform communication. And they worked on it and they were becoming very successful until they let somebody else reclassify what their success was and what their dream was. I have a not-for-profit that I've done some work with that they're trying to figure out how to best serve their clients in a economically depressed community. And everybody that works there works really hard, but they don't know data. And so when they're given all of this data, they can't sort it. One of the areas that I did was I looked through 45 sheets of Excel spreadsheets for them and identified where they were going with their clients and the major barriers to their clients accessing their program and services. And the scary part is the clients didn't know they existed. The people they were going to best serve didn't know they existed.
I could put a hole in the moment. That'd deflate you right there. That was extremely unfortunate.
And we talked about why their message wasn't getting out or why it wasn't landing. And partially it has to do with they didn't know their audience. They didn't know what technology they were using. They didn't know ways to access that information. And so they were using a model from when the people who had worked there were younger and in their stages of raising children. With a lot of the technology and the communication that's going on, I can barely keep up with which app is where and who do we use. And I'm on 7 different platforms. And at the end of the day, I don't have children of my own. I have 2 cats, but I have bandwidth to do that. I cannot understand how people with children and jobs keep up. I can understand why my parents took naps on Saturdays and Sundays when we were younger. And again, part of it is me coming in from the outside, not to say you're doing this wrong, but to say, what's your goal? What's your mission? What's your vision? What are you doing? And do you feel successful? And when people go, no, I don't feel, well, okay. Why are you continuously doing something that's not bringing you better results? And that's where we understand that as hardworking as they are, as talented as they are, they're in their organization, ways of doing things, and you need an outsider's perspective.
When you're working with a company and you have someone that goes, I have an epiphany, the eureka moment in there. Sometimes it might be a disruptor, not only for either the tech or the way to approach things, it might also disrupt that space. Do you find that then that it causes friction for colleagues going, why are we doing this? This is just adding to the workload, as opposed to, yeah, it's going to shift the workload, but, or, and in this case. How do you manage that? How do you kind of, relax, just try it? It's almost like getting that's a new food, Mom. Are you sure I want to eat that? Or your cats might give you that response.
How many people are eating Impossible burgers now?
I won't.
There's a huge market. There's also people coming out who say, we really ought to go to insect protein.
I've heard it.
I am not going to do insect protein. I will go to 100% vegetable before I go to insect protein. But the disruption in the innovation space has waves. And the first wave is always the eureka, the idea generator, and then you have the early adopter. And then you have what is called the implementation canyon. If you talk to any American or any Canadian, they will tell you that for a very long time, their diet was primarily made of beef. Chicken was considered something that poorer people ate. And pork wasn't even on most of the diets. Yet if you look at people who are from Asia, Europe, or North American in origin, pork's a pretty important protein. Just as lamb is for folks who are of Scottish descent and English descent. Here in the United States, we don't talk a lot about lamb. We don't talk a lot about mutton. But you go over to the United Kingdom and, oh my goodness, they got mutton chops, they've got leg of mutton, they've got lamb. There are waves of innovation. And just like people are like, why should I eat food that I'm not familiar with? After a while, it changes. So yes, we still have huge beef consumptions, but we also have large pork and chicken and vegetable and other proteins, because what you do is you move and keep slowly going until it becomes a tipping point. And Malcolm Gladwell talked about the fact that most tipping points don't happen because people are like, that ain't going to work. That person's a disruptor. And somehow, the next time the company gets together, upper management goes, you know what? For the good of the order, we got to let the innovator go because they're not innovating. They're creating conflict. And one of the points I get concerned about with conflict is that everybody thinks it's negative. But in reality, conflict can be your best friend.
It reminds me of my last workplace. I transitioned to a new job and I was getting the answer no from other departments, and not in a bad way. It was just to say, listen, we don't have the cycles for you. And it took me back at first, and then I thought, hang on, that means I don't have to shop inside the box. I can shop outside the box. So I took that as a hang on and ran with it. It worked well.
Casey, this podcast may be part of the solution. I don't know, but can always hope. But how do we give you a megaphone? I feel like I have an understanding for this team that says no one understood what we wanted. How do we get your stuff out?
Happily and fortunately, I do a lot on social media. I am on X because that's the oldest one besides Facebook. But I'm at KCJ_EDU. I'm on Instagram, CTJ Solutions. Really, if you Google me, hopefully I come up as the only dragon tamer, because on Blue Sky, I'm Dragon Tamer Dr. J. I think part of it too is it's tough work to say, I don't think we're doing as well as we can, because most organizations are by default trying to trumpet their own successes while hiding their own, it's not really failures, I would say shortcomings, because a lot of it's perception. And I am a huge believer in the idea of confidentiality. I'm a huge believer in working on projects and working with people and teams in a way that will allow them to self-diagnose. I'll give you another example. I was doing a leadership retreat for a not-for-profit. Within 15 minutes of me asking the question, so how do you think it's going? You could tell that there was a divided house. The problem faced was what the metrics and the measurables for one set of employees was not the same as a metric and a measurable for another set of employees. And nobody had taken the time to sit down and go, what are we really in this for? Why are we showing up Monday through Friday? And why do others of us do work that's Saturday, Sunday? And at the end of the day, a lot of people said, it's a job. I come in, I do my job, I want to go home. Other people said, but it's not a job, it's a calling. I believe in doing something for the betterment of others. And when we talked about that philosophical difference, what we began to realize was we didn't have all the people in the right seats on the bus. One of the areas they did with my help was look at how to transition people to a better fit. Not by saying you're terminated, but by saying you're an amazing person, you have a lot of talents, you're not happy. What role would you like to do that would bring you more joy and fulfillment? At the end of the day, you never want to let somebody go because they don't fit the mold, they're not a troublemaker. But what you have to realize is the behavior that is tolerated becomes the behavior that is modeled. If the leader wants to be seen as a leader, they have to make sure they're not allowing people under them to negatively influence their organization. And so what you look at is not layoffs, not terminations. You look at helping people strategically exit. That way, they're going to go, wow, that was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. And they're going to go, I had a rough go of it at my job, but wow, I'm going to be a customer now that I'm no longer an employee because I see what they did.
So you gave us a couple of ways, Blue Sky and LinkedIn. How big is your geography?
I will go anywhere virtually. I'm in upstate New York. doing this conversation, we have created an opportunity where you can go anywhere virtually. And if somebody wants me on site, well, that's a way that we can really talk through. Yes, it's good to be able to have dialogues online. And I hope for those of you on the 401 over by Toronto, may your tires and your brakes be better than the road salt and the Tim Hortons coffee that I miss tremendously. Now, I will say this, though, for those of you up near Montreal, you've got a lot of innovation up there. You really need to think about not only your innovation, but are you actively seeking out your best possible talent? That's one way that I can help you. Find the talent that doesn't fit the mold, but will build a machine to create a brand new mold.
I'm going to tell people we were talking to a podcast guest that told us to be moldy.
I want to say thank you to Casey Jakubowski, my co-host Wayne Pratt, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. If you enjoyed this conversation, if you found some insights, or you know what, you might need a kind of a tweaking inside your business, regardless whether you're a one-man person, the solopreneur, to the I've got a team and I'm trying to stay ahead of the curve. Get a hold of Casey.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVINSIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayneamotive, 8UTA, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter U.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we'd like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from A-Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner, and Wayne Pratt from Motive 8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer, please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.